All right, I'm going to say something a little controversial in this video, which is why it's going to end up so long, because when you do that, you have to add all this additional context. But basically, this video is all about how chasing victory at any cost actually brought LCS a ton of loss. And I mean in terms of viewership, fandom, interest, and et cetera, et cetera. And basically, the premise of this is that we really, really wanted to win, and that the way that we approached that competition and the way that we invested in trying to win is what has hurt the LCS so much. This video, by the way, is sponsored by you. Please join the YouTube channel if you want to. You can become a member by clicking the join button below. You get early access to videos. It's a great way to support content like this, where I'm paying somebody to be here and record this and edit it. And anyway, let's take a step back and talk a little bit about what I mean by all of this. And to do so, we actually really need to think about the way that the LCS was formed and the way that these teams were formed. By and large, they were formed by competitors, people who really wanted to compete. That makes sense, right? Because they're esports teams, the competitive environment, etc. And one of my favorite examples of this is Steve. Steve, I think, is a great dude in the space. I really like having him in the LCS and really like the team that he has built. He is a former pro. A lot of people don't know that. You can actually look at this video, which will be on here or here, wherever Drew decides to put it, where I interviewed him, because he used to be support for Double Lift. People don't know that, but way back in the day. And he's the type of dude that just wants North America to succeed. He really cares about North American success and his team winning, and he's been derided by fans and others in the space for sometimes being really optimistic going into an international event, and also for just the sheer amount of resources and money he has put into trying to get great talent for North America to succeed. I really like that, and I think it's fantastic to have Steve's in the space. I want to make that clear. And I don't want to single out Steve, because I think that this is the way it is for many different people in the space, and a lot of the different team owners. Even if they came in and they were not pro players, they're the type of people who are just competitive. But the other thing I want to talk about here is franchising in 2018, because I think many fans hate the fact that we franchised. And I get it, because those fans like the excitement of the promotion relegation system. They feel like there are, quote unquote, bottom feeder teams in the league that don't ever find success, and this is a great way to wash them out. And I totally understand it. I do disagree, though, that franchising was a bad thing, because being around the space at the time, I understand why it was put in place. We were getting into a really bad spot with the LCS. You had situations where sponsors did not really want to invest into long-term deals with teams, which are the things that make brands sustainable over a long period of time, right? If you are a sponsor, you want to come in for a couple years, but you're not even sure if your LCS team is going to be around for more than 3 months. So inking a deal with this organization is not a good thing. That's not great. And I remember this was at a time where LCS was massive, and so that carried the LCS team would probably be the main contributing factor to a brand coming in. The other thing was that players were just stressed as hell. And obviously they're stressed as hell these days, but the fact that you had some orgs or teams that were kind of player run, and if they got relegated, that was perhaps the end of their career. And so you had a situation. And I get that everybody goes, oh, these are just the excuses that the owners brought up, but they were real. These were actual complications that were happening at the time, and sort of dismissing them is, in my opinion, intellectually dishonest. But I will agree with you that franchise kind of fucked us in one way, which was money. So ironically, the thing that was supposed to be solving a lot of these concerns and the long-term viability of these teams and all that stuff, the money coming in from VCs, that's a thing that ended up causing a lot of problems for us long-term. And I know a lot of people watching this video right now are saying, yeah, we all already know this. We understand how VC money has created a weird bubble, blah, blah, blah. You could probably think of one or two reasons why this is a big thing, but I want to look at it more systemically in terms of what it did across the board, because I think it's actually a much bigger deal than people think, and it's not just isolated to one or two different things. Because I look at the 2018 franchising year as kind of this inflection point that shattered a lot of the strength of the LCS as a brand and as a business and as an entertainment product. Not because of the franchising model, but purely because of the amount of dollars that came in. Because when you get all this money, the next question that you have to answer is, well, how are we going to become popular? How are we going to become a big brand? How do we grow this thing? Because you need fans to make this business viable. They have to buy merch, they have to support the team and the sponsors and all that stuff. And this begs the question, how do you do this? Well, in traditional sports, there are kind of two major ways to do this besides winning. You have obviously the sort of regionalized fandom where, hey, if I am a person who's lived in Boston, I'm probably going to root for the Red Sox over other teams because they're regional to me. You also have, I think, oftentimes the history of your family or your friends or whatever being associated with the team, so you come in with that, right? Well, my friend or my family has always rooted for this team, or we used to watch these games growing up, and so that is who I am a fan of. Obviously, there's also the winning thing, but those first two don't really work in esports, right? Because we don't obviously have the regionalized thing. I know some people think we should. That's a different conversation. But then we also don't have the history stuff because we're brand new. So when you are a carpenter and everything looks like a nail, it's the same as when you are a competitor. Your solution to this question is, we'll just fucking win. But this is a flawed strategy. And I'm not saying that winning is bad or that teams shouldn't try to win. I'm trying to rush in there because I know a lot of people will be like, oh, Travis is not, he doesn't get it. It's all about winning. But the idea of answering the question, how do we become popular, and the only answer being by winning, is logically flawed. Because think about it this way. You can only have one winner per split. And so over the course of a couple of years, you're probably only going to have 2 to 3 winners. I mean, there's been times, right, even where over the course of a 2-year period, you only really had one winner. And maybe there's some fandom around the team that always makes it to finals but doesn't win. I'm not saying it exclusively goes to the winner. But you're probably only looking at around 2 to 3 different teams. And even if you start to have other teams that come up, the moment that the team starts losing in this system that you have come up with, they are on the decline as a brand. And so you're kind of in a situation where, hey, 2 to 3 teams out of our 10-team league are going to be popular and the rest aren't. So I ask you, how is that sustainable for a league? Like, how are these other businesses supposed to support themselves in a world where your whole thing is based just exclusively around winning? And by the way, that's only locally, because if your goal is to win globally, I think it's an even more flawed strategy because you don't have control over these other systems. You can only deal with the variables in your own space. And some of these other regions have inherent advantages to them that we can try to spend more or do stuff, but you're never going to be able to guarantee international success as long as these other regions are somewhat uncontrolled, or they're able to do other things. They have all these other inherent advantages. You just are never able to guarantee it. So pitting all your eggs in this basket not only kind of screws you over on a local and domestic perspective, but also is an issue for you globally. So we've established that winning can't be the only answer, but it's kind of the most obvious one, especially for a lot of people who are competitors themselves. So this brings us all the way back to 2018, where we get what I like to think of as the arms race, where suddenly teams have all this money, all this capital, it's all flushed in and come into the space, and people are like, well, what do we do with these millions of dollars? We have to get we have to get popular, we have to get wins, we have to do all this stuff. And so from a fan perspective, if you were watching LCS in 2018, what changes, right? All this money's coming into the space, what is better for you? Well, it really is only about the fact that your team is going to try harder to win from a financial perspective because they've decided not to invest that money into content or events or community functions or features or ways to engage with their community better. Maybe there's a little bit more content. I'm not trying to say that like 100 Thieves wasn't doing content back in the day or something like that, but by and large, these millions of dollars go into competitive operations at these organizations. So they go into things like player salaries, obviously, but also coach salaries, analysts. A lot of these teams got like way bigger rosters of support staff, psychologists, chefs, housing, legal fees for visas and lawyers and all that stuff, because you got to bring these players over from other regions whenever you're bringing players not from North America. First class travel, suddenly a lot of players started traveling first class. Anyway, in theory, this is great, but think about it from the fan perspective. All this investment is coming in, and the only way that your experience is changing is, well, now your team has more money to invest into competitive success. But this is kind of the irony of the situation, because your team is doing this, but so is everybody else. And because competition is relative to everybody else around you, everyone's basically staying at the same spot. Obviously, you have some teams that kind of surge up because they've got a little bit more capital or they've hired some slightly better people. But for the most part, like, you know, it's not like your experience has changed too much. Like Cloud9 is a great example where they got some investment, but like the Cloud9 fan experience has not really gotten a lot better over the years. They have things like Stratus and all that stuff, but it's not a situation where they took all those millions and made it much better. And I get it, right? Because this makes sense. I don't think that players should not see money whenever it comes in and goes to these teams, or that players should not have good sports mental health resources around them or something like that. But it is worth noting that whenever you're diverting all these funds to that side, that you're not really doing anything. In fact, the funniest thing is, for I think the majority of franchising now, the biggest question about whether or not your team is going to win is just based around is double if playing for your roster, or at least probably for at least half that time. The other thing that's happened alongside all of this is how much teams have started to push North American talent out. And I really have to pause here and make it clear that I think it is definitely possible for fans of this region to become fans of players from other regions. It is not about race or creed or where you're from or whatever. And I think we have clear evidence in terms of the fandom that's been built around Jensen and Bjergsen and others over the years. But you have to have these players be committed to the region that they are playing in and be here for a long time. Because if you have players that are only coming over because, hey, like the pay is better and it's easier for me to lift a trophy, then what happens when the pay check goes away or they feel like they can't lift the trophy? They're just going to leave. Or what's even more likely is the player comes over for 1 year and the team goes, wow, we paid them a lot of money and we didn't lift the trophy. So now we're just going to send them back and bring a new person over here and pay them that money and try to lift. And if not, then they're out. And so what you end up in is in a situation where players are not sticking around for years. And you can't have players rotating in and out of the league, because if they're rotating in and out of the league, people cannot become attached to them. You know, if you become a fan of a player in 1 year and then that player leaves, now you have a brand new player that you have to become a fan of. And fandom is inherently important to a league because that's what creates retention. You retain players or fans over years by retaining players and having that connection going. Otherwise, your fans all start to tune out of the league. Does that sound familiar? All right, so to illustrate my point on this topic, especially because I know people have heard me talk about it on Hotline League, etc., but I'm going to name some names here, all right? Whippo, Finn, Crown, Hansama, Mickey, Abadage, Amazing, Ryu, Kaori, Power of Evil, Pride Stalker, Newbie, Armut, Ruin, Shenyi, Sword Art, Kabe, Fleshy, Destiny, Aika, Takui, Alfari, Inspired, Perks, Ole, Diplex, Ryoma, Bang, Levi, Jose Diodo, Lighter, Lost, Blue, Maple, Huni, KI Duo, Broken Blade, Arrow, Xerxes, Soaz, Jizuke. Like, that is a massive list. It's not even all the names. I couldn't find all of them. But those are all players that have played in the league in the last several years and are no longer in the league. And in a lot of cases, they were here for a split or a year or whatever. And I bet you some of those names, when I said it, you were like, oh, wait, did that player actually play in the league? Oh, yeah, they did for that one split. Or, wow, I completely forgot about that player. So when teams start swapping out players, it becomes a huge issue. But also, you have a situation where it's not just the teams, right? Because now the players feel less inclined to participate in anything whenever it's only about competition. Because again, it's only about winning. So why should I care about doing any of this other stuff? And you see this in a lot of situations where players have stopped streaming for the most part. They've started to. Some of these things have started to turn around. But for the most part of the last several years, you had players stop streaming, including some really notable famous pros who I won't name and shame. And my friends on a lot of these teams who did content, like on the content teams for a lot of these organizations, told me it became like pulling teeth to try to get a lot of these players to participate in content because they didn't want to do it. And then even on my side, it became a lot harder for a while to get interviews with players, to the extent that Riot had to change a bunch of rules to require more players to do interviews because the teams were not enforcing them to do it. And why should they? Right? Because the interview requests, by and large, are going through GMs because they haven't usually invested in the type of PR people that are going to be around on a game day because, again, all that money is going to competitive operations. And the GM's metric for success is winning, not how much these players are doing interviews or how popular they are. And so you just end up in a situation where, like, even the players are not bought in on anything other than winning. And again, that sounds crazy to complain about because I know we all care about winning, but these other things matter too. And when you're not winning, all right. The other thing that I think is a little more ephemeral and is a little weird to touch on, we don't really talk about too much, is like, I do think that the money going to all these players made them, in some cases, less approachable. Again, I'm not saying they didn't deserve paychecks, but like, I think it's worth mentioning that you had a situation where most of the content that the team started putting out were sponsored content pieces. I make content that is sponsored all the time. I think that's really important. But there's a big difference between the content that was coming out before, where you'd see goofy videos like Reggie paying Rain Man money to roll around in a puddle or whatever. Like, I know this content sounds weird, but like, there's a lot of really just goofy, I think more authentic content that was being made by these teams with the players in them that wasn't actually being created anymore. Whenever it became, the idea was like, okay, this brand has this sort of story that they're trying to tell, and so we have to make a video that like helps them tell that story. You ended up in a situation where there was a lot less behind the scenes footage because teams started to worry, I think, that, hey, putting this footage out there maybe makes our team look bad or messes with chemistry or whatever. And so a lot of those behind the scenes shows eventually got canceled because they were not interesting anymore, because they were fascinating when you saw the behind the scenes team dynamics. But when it just became like B-roll footage and then an interview with a player, it was like, this is not what people were watching before. And I actually think that, generally speaking, it's just a lot easier to relate to a bunch of people who are around your age in maybe a similar financial situation as young adults trying to figure out how to live in a big city, all sharing like a small apartment or something like that, than it is to relate to somebody who's like moved to the country for 1 year and whose like biggest issue is, oh, my manager or coach stole the money from selling my BMW. It's just a very different thing. So what do you do here? So you have sacrificed fandom and you've sacrificed the viewership in tandem with that for nothing. Because we chased victory, and how much victory have we had? I think it is, people get a little too hard on the North American teams for not competing internationally. We can only control the variables in our own way. And yes, there's conversations to be had about Champions Queue and all that stuff. But like, by and large, I think it's going to be really tough internationally, even if all those things are good. But we did nothing other than try to win, and we lost constantly. And the teams domestically, every split, 9 teams lose. So whatever your story is, just we win, and that's what we're doing. How are people going to relate and connect to any of that, especially when the players are going in and out? And I just want to say here at the end that I don't fault anyone. I get it. Like, when all this money was going to teams and a lot of the leadership and ownership and eventually beginning, the people that have been around for a while started the teams, they pocketed millions of dollars. I think it makes sense that a lot of these players got paid out too. You know, I don't think I would feel comfortable in a world where players were not making a lot of money, but their ownership groups were making tons. In fact, I complained about that way back in the day before franchising. And I also think that like a lot of these the team leadership had good intentions. I want people like Steve in the league, and I use his name only because I know he's a good enough guy that he's not going to be offended by me doing this. Like, I think he's great. But also, it can't all be about winning. Because then I think we end up in the exact situation we're in right now, where we have sacrificed so much in the pursuit a victory, and yet we have nothing for it. Anyway, that's the video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this informative. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with it or tell me I'm wrong on a number of reasons, but that's completely fine. If you like videos like this, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. I'm going to try to do more videos like this. And also, if you want, you can become a member of the channel starting at $2.99. That supports the content, and it gets you early access to stuff on the channel. It's pretty cool. So thanks so much for watching, and hope you watch the next one too.